There is general decline in the reading habits among students in general and university students in particular. Research students are not far behind in this trend of declining reading habits. What are the causes of the, the trend of non-reading research students and what are its consequences? These are the questions that we will briefly respond to in this presentation. So first of all, the importance of reading. Uh, we must know that reading is an integral and most important part of most research processes and most research degrees. Reading and writing um, essentially go together in the process of conducting research, in documenting research, and in reporting research. And generally, it is almost impossible for academic researchers um, and student researchers, especially, to conceive, to undertake, and to disseminate research studies, research projects, and to report uh, the outcomes of those research projects or processes without constant, comprehensive, and critical reading. Why is it that reading is so important for research students? First of all, research students need to build a strong knowledge base in the particular areas in which they are working. And therefore, without reading, that particular uh, knowledge base that they need to build cannot be developed, cannot be built. Secondly, um, reading helps in the development of academic language. So, as we know that as researchers, we need to develop particular vocabulary, we need to understand the particular structure, style, and the jargon of the academia or in the particular fields of academic in which we are actually working. So, developing language is something that happens through persistent reading. Thirdly, reading enhances the critical thinking and the analytical capacities of the research students. And so, in the absence of adequate critical thinking and analytical capacities, it is difficult for researchers, for student researchers, to conduct good research projects, and that is why it is important for them to read. Then it brings in objectivity. Uh, the process of adding to academic knowledge, the process of broadening the horizons, the process of developing the particular vocabulary in the fields in which students, researchers are working, is something that helps in bringing in more objectivity, rationality, and scientific thinking or scientific outlook of the research students, and that is why reading is very important. Next, the reading process helps the research students in strengthening their capacities for argumentation, for making arguments or for countering arguments, which is an essential part of the analysis process in the research projects. Then it also, the reading also helps the researchers in developing academic humility, where this actually broadens their thinking in terms of accepting other point of views or in terms of accepting counter narratives to their own points of view. And then lastly, this is the process, reading is the process that contextualizes or rationalizes scientific knowledge. So it helps the research student to understand their knowledge in its particular context and in terms of rationalization as a scientific process of the development of knowledge. Now, what are the causes? That despite this importance, the research students lag, or they are not reading sufficiently, or they're not reading at all. So there are certain causes that we need uh, to consider. The first one is the impact of previous education or schooling. In many cases, reading has not been developed in the modern schools and colleges. And so students, before they come and enroll in in research degrees, they need to have sufficient exposure to an environment of reading, which is increasingly becoming difficult in today's digital world. The span of attention, and in many cases, um, the schooling system is something where the reading habit is not developed, it is not given proper importance, the particular infrastructure is not available, the libraries are not facilitated, and reading habit is not rewarded in terms of academic rewards. And so that kind of thing um, actually turns into a kind of habit of non-reading right from the very beginning. Then inadequacy of literacy skills. Again, for reading, one needs to have adequate literacy skills, which actually means that they need to have sufficient vocabulary, they need to have understanding of the grammar and structure, they need to have sufficient background knowledge. And so, inadequate literacy skills that have been developed at the previous educational levels stands in the way of actually developing the reading habit among research students. Inadequate course or curriculum, that is the content and structure of the research syllabi, is something that also stands in the way of developing the reading habits or reading interests of the research students. In many cases, the content or curriculum of the research degrees is developed in such a way where there is generally no reward for reading and no incentives for developing the reading habits of the students. And so that is something uh, that the professors will generally encourage students to read, but because there is no there are no incentives in terms of reward for reading, so that is something that impacts the students' motivation to read. Then inadequate evaluation system. Again, in the evaluation system, generally reading, especially critical reading, is not generally evaluated, and as a result, students lack the motivation to read. Inadequate facilities such as access to relevant reading facilities, libraries, digital libraries, is another cause of the non-reading research students. And then lack of motivation, both intrinsic motivation, where reading is considered as a reward on its own, and extrinsic motivation in terms of, for example, better grades and such types of motivation. So lack of these types of motivation also results in the phenomena of non-reading research students. Then the teachers or professors or supervisors role is also important. In many cases, the teachers, professors or supervisors fail to develop or develop the interest of the research student for reading, or to persuade them to read. In many cases, the researcher, the supervisors or professors can do modeling of reading, can present themselves as reading models. But unfortunately, that is something that also does not happen frequently in the current academia, mainly because of the multiple engagements of the supervisors or the professors in non-academic activities, in managerial activities, rather than in academic activities involving reading. Um, then, so what are the consequences overall? Generally, non-reading or lack of reading leads to several problems. So one of the problems is deficient general and subject knowledge on the part of the students. This is generally visible in their research reports, in their research thesis, and in the vivas in which um, they are often not able to defend themselves or to indicate sufficient general knowledge and subject knowledge in the areas in which they have conducted their research. Then inadequate research knowledge and skills, again because of the non-reading attitude, the research students often indicate inadequate research knowledge and skills. In many cases, they fail to even rationalize or justify the methodological choices or the particular statistical um, or thematic analyses that they have done in their studies. Um, then, insufficient reading and writing practice is another consequence of the attitude of the non-reading attitude of research students. Uh, because they are not interested in reading and writing. As a result, what happens is that in many cases they resort to the copy paste kind of culture rather than conducting proper critical literature review and, and involving in adequate critical practice of writing. Then the next result or consequence of this is inadequate development and presentation of research proposals, research methodology sections, analyses, discussions, and research reports. Again, most often it is visible in the research reports, in the research theses, that the research proposals are not properly developed and presented. The methodology sections are deficient. The analyses are superficial. The discussion section is quite descriptive, and generally the research reports are not written um, a, at a level that is acceptable at the research degree level. Then again, the other very serious consequence of non-reading attitude of research students is that they often resort to copy pasting, regurgitation of the others' ideas without any critical analysis of their own, and most importantly, plagiarism, which is actually a repetition of or presentation of others' ideas either in other words or in their own words without properly citing and properly acknowledging those sources. And so, overall, because of the non reading attitude of research students, what happens is that the result is an overall low quality of research, both in terms of conceptualization or conceiving, the process of conceiving of research, the conduct of research, and the ultimate outcomes of research. So it is very important that reading habits, persistent, critical, or and in-depth reading habits must be developed among research students in order to improve the overall quality of research and in order to aid to the authenticity and validity of the research of the student research process and product at the university level.